say a little something about how I happened to be in Central City. So I guess start at the beginning. I was born with a fairly severe birth defect. No money. After my parents had paid for me to go 3 years at a private boys military academy, and 3 years at college, they were pretty well tapped out. I even borrowed, had my grandfather, who had a little country store, to go on my note for $3,000. That was a lot of money back then. But anyway, I came up with a brilliant idea, or I found out that the state of Kentucky would loan you money if you would go back to Kentucky in a rural area. And I said, oh, this is too good to be true. Of course, I pulled a Givens that I'm noted for. I never read anything. I never read the contract. I always found if you read the fine print, it'd make you so nervous you wouldn't want to do it. So I didn't read it. So I borrowed money from the state of Kentucky for 3 years. Medical school was 3 years for me. It was unusual. Memphis did that, and school up in the Northeast did it. So after that, I interned in Nashville at Baptist Hospital, and I got this little postcard that said greetings. So when that was all finished, I found myself at a place called Dugway Proving Grounds. It's a place you've never heard of because the armed forces don't want you to hear it. It's the most secret place in the United States. And it's the size of Rhode Island, and it's in the middle of the desert. And I'm in San Antonio, and my dad called and says, what's going on? I said, beats me, my recruiting class has left. I'm here by myself. He said, well, the FBI guys are in Lewisburg asking about you. So it turns out I had a top secret clearance thing. I get out there, there's 15-bed hospital, there's 2 doctors, and the colonel, he's a doctor, that's 3. Then I'm number 4. He wears my hand out, said, oh, thank goodness, we've got our new radiologist. And I started laughing. He goes to get coffee, and these other doctors said, Givens, I wouldn't laugh. And I said, what are you talking about? He said, that means you're going to be the radiologist. I said, I don't know from anything. And he said, yeah, none of the rest of us do either. Because we don't have a radiologist. But he showed me the library, and it was extensive. And he realized when he saw the top secret clearance that I was not going to a war zone. I was a nervous wreck. Doctors coming out there, they say 2 months, Vietnam, 2 months, Vietnam. But you cannot go to a war zone if you have top secret clearance. It's against the law. Congress passed a law, and obviously the reason is you're going to tell them everything you know. So he wanted a radiologist, and it was so valuable, I didn't realize what kind of education I was getting. But the other doctors would, call me at night, Givens, come over and see if you can figure this thing out. And I'd go read the book, and it was so valuable to me when I went into practice. Okay, at the end of that 2 years, I began to think about this contract that I signed. And so I called KMA or whoever they were or something. And I told them, I said, I've been accepted for 2 residencies. One is the John Gaston in Memphis, which is where I went to school, and the other one was Charity in New Orleans. I like big towns. I always have. So I said, I'm going to do that first, and then I'll honor this contract. And they said, oh, we don't think so. I said, you didn't read the fine print. I said, you have to do that later. I said, you got to go now for 3 years. I got out of the Army, and there was a guy that I played baseball against in Russellville. He heard about it, and he married a lady who was in Maysville, Kentucky. If you've ever been to Maysville, I mean, it is on a bluff. You got to walk like this to get from one house to the other. That's where all the Clooney's hang out. Nick, Rosemary, George, and all that stuff. Well, there were 2 guys there, and the going rate for a doctor at that time was $18,000. sometimes 21,000. But anyway, I'm on the verge of signing this contract. I didn't like it. All I wanted to do was get out of this contract and go someplace for 3 years and forget it. At that time, you had a doctor here in Central City named Keith Linville. He is on a houseboat out with Orville Brown on Kentucky Lake and develops a severe case of myocarditis, which is an inflammation of the heart. He would have been a perfect candidate for a heart transplant. Unfortunately, they weren't doing it at that time. He contacted me and he said, Dr. Bogus is getting drafted just as you're coming out. Said, we got a vacant office. Said, come and do it. I didn't want to do it. But that was pretty convenient. I didn't want to do it because my mother and dad had a place of business in the town. I never liked to get close like that. But he talked me into it. Now, Keith Linville lived 2 or 3 years. He's up at Rose Hill Cemetery. His wife married a man from Germany. Her family were the Readers. And she would come in every year, and I did all of her physical and blood work and all like this. She said the socialized medicine in Germany was not to her liking. But anyway, there's Keith Linville. There's another doctor in town, really good doctor, named Mark Judge. He built the house that Wee Brown lived in, out across from Joe Ben. And he was a good doctor. He delivered Nicole. And I could relate to him. Laid back guy, everything perfect. I went over to look at his sample closet one day looking for something. It was wall-to-wall Mylanta. At that time, ulcers were treated with milk and Mylanta, alternating every 30 to 45 minutes. Terrible treatment, didn't work. In fact, it caused a rebound with the pH. But anyway, there was no Tegamet, there was no pills. So I looked at all that Mylanta and I said, I said, Mark, there may be trouble in paradise here. I said, who's drinking all this Mylanta? He said, I am. Well, that told me he wasn't as laid back as I thought. He came to see me one day and said, I'm out of here. Married, he's got 3 kids, 4 kids, they're all athletic, great family and all this kind of stuff. He said, I've been accepted for an ophthalmology residency in Louisville. He wasn't up there 2 days. He calls me and says, guess what? There's a problem. One of the guys is not showing up, and I told him about you. You can have it. That was on a Friday. I said, how long have I got to think about it? He said, till Monday. Miserable weekend for me. There were 2 things. I never could stand to do the same thing every day. And I didn't think I could look at the eye the rest of my life. Second thing is, I couldn't do anything with my finger. Still can't. Got that after my mother. First time I went into surgery in medical school, the surgeon looked at me, he said, Givens, this is not it. I said, I know. But I couldn't see myself having to do a cataract with my fumble-fisted and awkward fingers. So I said, no, I'm not going to do it. Mark left here and he's settled in Joplin, Missouri. After he'd been gone about 4 years, he called and said, are you and Jane going to the Derby? And I said, yes. He said, I am too. He said, I'm making reservations. Having a fit to talk to you. He said, we'll all get together. That was great. He walks into the restaurant. He's got on a toupee and his ear pierced. Mark was gay. I would have never picked up on him. He was a wonderful doctor, great, and he died a few years ago in his 70s in Colorado Springs of Parkinson's disease. And I can imagine how traumatic that would have been for him in his 50s when he developed it and developed that tremor. And you're making your living trying to do cataracts. There's the story of Mark Judge. Okay, it's 3 years is up. So Givens, if you don't like small towns, and your 3 years is up, why didn't you leave? Well, this brings up the root of all evil. Money. It was, I realized there was something going on after 3 or 4 months. And I sneaked around to see if everything was like they were telling me. Trover Clinic started their physicians out at 18,000. And I will tell you how the Trover Clinic was built. You probably know, but I'll tell you the 2 ways. Is when you signed the contract at Trover Clinic for 18,000, you were going to be extremely rich when you retired, because your compensation was based on shares of what was known as Madisonville Realty, which at that time consisted of the hospital, the clinic, and a bank. So the better you did, the more productive you were, the more shares you got. Now guys that were savvy picked up real quick, maybe this is not gonna work. Maybe this is not gonna be a good thing. But Fall and Loman kept buying everything in town until they pulled the gish. That's when you buy the whole town and find out it's not working. Well, after they bought all this crap in Madisonville, they found out it wasn't worth anything. Now the doctors that had been there for years were trapped. The new guys in and out. And that's what caused the high turnover rate. So that's why they could recruit easy, is they were betting on these shares of the Madisonville Realty. And the other thing is, they built the clinic this way. When you went over there and you had an ingrown toenail, you saw your doctor. And he said, yes, I think this is an ingrown toenail. But I'm gonna let you see my buddy down the hall, who is a dermatologist, to get his opinion. You see the dermatologist? Yeah, I believe it's an ingrown toenail. I'm gonna send you across the hall to see my friend to fix this for you. So you got 3 visits with an ingrown toenail. Where you see Givens, you got 1 visit. But the ingrown toenail deal was multiple referrals within the clinic. Nothing illegal about that, and you can't stop it. Loman Trover had me over to his house. I knew more about his house than did mine. I made me come. Madisonville Country Club, any function. And I felt like I had to show up to keep good rapport between the 2 communities. And of course, it all led to the contract. Givens, sign. I've got something that you need. Well, what is it? Well, backup. You can get a good night's sleep. I will have guys over Central City, and you can get out of this rat race you're in, which was awful tempting. But anyway, I never did do that. So when I got to looking at what was going on here and the money, I started scouting around to find out what is it in Warren County. Same deal, 18,000, 21. You might make 40,000, 50,000, which was big money 6 years ago. But the UMWA here was unique and fantastic for the people. You could not keep people out of the office. And the thing was, the money that was being generated, the buying power was unbelievable. I bought a brand new car from Stuart Bonet. It was 1/30th of my salary. You buy a car now, what is it? Yeah, it's 25% of your salary, maybe 50. So I got to thinking at the end of 3 years, well, how can you give this up? This is a unique deal that just involves 2 counties, Muhlenberg and Hopkins. Eastern Kentucky involved 2 or 3 counties, Inez and Harlan. And if you were any place else in Kentucky, you were just high and dry. But this UMWA thing was just, they couldn't get out of the contract. I mean, the patient, all their medicines were paid for. I would see people, oh yeah, I saw this doctor this morning. I just wanted to come this afternoon to get your opinion. I mean, and they couldn't do anything about it. And you handed in an invoice at the end of each month that showed everybody that came in, what was wrong with them, and Daryl knows all of this type stuff, but it was really something else. I said, why leave, disrupt your family, do this residency, and turn right around and do the exact same thing as you're doing now? But anyway, that's how I got here. Then I'll tell you, we'll start out with some bad things, and then we'll get to some humor later on. The bad thing was the 1968 and 69 flu vaccine was flawed. The COVID, yeah, that's a piece of cake. But this flu vaccine back then caused thousands of cases of something called Guillain-Barré disease, where you start getting paralyzed at the toes. Comes clear up to here, you got to get put on a machine. You're going to die if you're not lucky. Fortunately, most people survive, but there were a lot of deaths from that flu vaccine. Second thing is, in the early 70s, and y'all remember it, this changed my life pretty good bit. We had 3 little girls in Central City, bang, 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 die. I mean, it was just one after the other. Y'all probably know some of them. I think Benny Ogden had a daughter, Anita, Charles Eddie and Sheila Martin. I happen to have that one. Her name was Cindy. She was 9 years old. That was just heart-wrenching when I saw that happen right in front of my face and couldn't do anything about it. Now, you would think that that's bad, but it's not a big deal. It is absolutely terrible. You have to go to your numbers. You got a town of 5,000 people, you got 3 deaths. If that was Owensboro, say it was 60,000 people back then, that would be 36 people dying in Owensboro. Well, the National Guard would be there, CDC and everybody else. Fortunately, it was all over them, and when the first freeze comes, you're home free. Third thing is, that was bad, but fortunate for me, I saw something that I bet you could line up 1,000 doctors and they would never see it. You guys probably know that Central City had a jail, and it was right out of the Western movie. No, it was identical, I swear. In the Western movies, the sheriff and everybody's out in the open, and the prisoners out in the open, and everybody just milling around together. Well, that's the way it was. I don't know how I got there, whether the cops came to get me or anyway, but it was in the area of Lester Motors, Clinic Pharmacy, in that block somewhere. So they took me into jail, and the cell is right back against the wall, and it's enough for a whole bunch of people to get in. And back then, doctors had a bag, and you had morphine and Demerol and all that crap, and they said, "Doctor, there's a guy laying down here, we can't rouse him." Fortunately for me, and the thing that made me see something that nobody probably had ever seen, or a lot of doctors, is that this man was laying transverse to my vision. In other words, he was laying crossways. Well, when they opened up the cell, that allowed me to see the concrete that he was laying on. He was bowed. All of his weight was on his hips and on his shoulders and head. It was like this. That's something that I had read about in medicine. It's called apostomos. It's where the central nervous system is so inflamed that the body reverses its position. Well, when I saw that, I just said, "Oh, don't go any further. I mean, let's stop right here." And I told all those guys, I said, "Now, don't go home and start kissing and hugging on your wife." I said, "Y'all get out of here now, one at a time, take off all your clothes, wash them, take a thorough shower, head to toe, and in the morning go see your doctor because you need penicillin. We all do." and I was not easily scared. But that is Neisseria meningitis. It's what the old folks call spinal meningitis. So I left early, or left right then. I said, let's don't get any closer. I know what's wrong with this guy. He's gonna die. But I said, y'all try to get him to the hospital. And I went to the hospital and I pulled a Shakespeare. I said, something bad this way comes. And I made everybody get completely dressed up. And sure enough, the guy's white count was 70 or 80,000. Massive doses of, I mean, millions and millions of doses of penicillin, which is the drug of choice. Couldn't save him. He died a few hours later. And let me give you the Paul Harvey hint here, which will bring you up to date for today. Is when they arrested this guy, of course he's disorderly and having a fight, and he had a bloody nose. Well, the bloody nose gave me the Dateline clue. When this guy got hit in the nose, it fractured something called the cribriform plate. That is what all drug companies try to get through. They try to get their medicine to go through that, and it's difficult to do. Well, when they fractured that, this man had the bug in his nostril, like I might now, and that bug marched right into his brain. Now, the reason I'm bringing this up, do y'all realize the guy in Florida the other day that's in his home, and he's irrigating his sinuses with tap water, and he dies from the flesh-eating organism. So don't ever snuff up this way with water. Farm ponds, lakes, oceans, you don't want to ever do this type of thing, because this global warming and the increasing temperature of the water has caused this to get into municipal water supplies. You would never suspect that you can just go to your faucet and die from doing that. But it's because this bug can get through the cribriform plate. Okay, that's bad stuff. Let's talk about let's talk about some other stuff. I hadn't been here very long, and this lady called me, and she was just beside herself, hysterical. Her little boy, 2 or 3 years old or something, had been stung, and as she said, in his privates. That was her word. And it was just terrible. And I tried to calm her down. I said, look, if you'll do some cool compresses and let me call in some liquid Benadryl, in a few hours, everything will be back to normal. She said, if you don't come to the emergency room and see him, I'm going to send my husband after you. Well, being little and not wanting to be whipped, I decided to go to the emergency room. Well, she was right. I mean, that was, poor little fella. The swelling was so tremendous that everything was unrecognizable. It looked like a head of cauliflower or something. So I shook my head. I said, the first thing we have got to do is we got to find the bee that did this. And she said, well, why in the world would you want to do that? I said, I want to take it home with me. Obviously, I didn't have to treat that lady. I mean, that pretty well solved that problem. The second thing is, after a while, a lady called me, Katie Bean. And she said her husband was in severe, terrible pain. Could I come to see him? Well, I didn't know anybody there, or where they lived, or whatever. Finally, I got there, and she took me to the back bedroom, and Ronnie was just, reeling all over the place, laying on the floor. Well, that gives you the diagnosis without even trying to be a hero and examine him. Because when you have a kidney stone, the pain is so severe, the patient can't stay still. I mean, half the time you got to chase them around the room. They just cannot stay still because it's excruciating pain. Well, anyway, I'm trying to do my best and feel of his belly or talk to him or something. And all the time I'm doing this, Ronnie is doing this. You know, and this type thing. Well, I didn't say anything, but evidently I was between he and the television. So I gave him a big shot and told him what to do and what we needed to do and all this stuff. And of course, Ronnie never did any of it. That's why he lived to be such an advanced age. He stayed away from doctors. But as everybody knows, you know, back then I never had a penny, and I never carried money, but I had church accounts everywhere. So Cheney's Barbecue, they had a pretty darn good barbecue sandwich, and I was hungry, and so I go over there, and they had seen me backing out of his parking lot. And I go in there, and these guys, of course, I don't know anybody, I'm new in town, and they said, well, what's wrong with Ronnie? And I said, oh, well, he's got a lot of pain, he's got a kidney stone. And this guy said, look, Doc, I hate to contradict you, but said that pain had nothing to do with the kidney stone. I said, what do you mean? He said, oh, he's got $100 bet on the World Series game, and for me, he just hit a home run. I had another, I can't name names, and, you know, but this lady would come in about every 10 years, and she was healthy, nicely, and she was concerned about her weight, which is fine. You know, most people are, and you like to see that. But anytime there was something new, you know, she'd want to try it. And I never would do it. And she said, well, you know, I can go right across the hall and get diet pills. I said, well, you're going to have to do it. I mean, she and I would fight, and I never would give her medicine because they were unhealthy for the heart. And as y'all remember, all these class action things, weren't your heart valve problems? Well, I always tried to keep up and read early in medicine, and I read about this pill that they were going to try to put on the market. And I even chuckled reading about it because it was so ridiculous. This medicine would bind up everything in the gut, your calories and everything else, and would not allow it to be absorbed. Well, that's what caused you to lose weight, because you were deprived of all the nutrients. But it caused an explosive diarrhea. You could not even grunt or talk. And on top of that, it called a golden yellow color to the stool, which would not come out of any fabrics. There's no way to get that. Well, sure enough, you know, money, they put it on the market. And the minute the television ads, the lady comes in. And I knew exactly that she'd seen it on TV. Well, I talked to her with my back to her because I was afraid I couldn't control my emotions. I looked at her and I said, okay, I said, I'm going to let you try this because it's not going to affect your heart. And I wrote her the prescription and gave it to her. 2 or 3 days later, I ran into her and she starts running at me and slinging her purse at me. She said, I knew something was wrong when you wrote that prescription. She said, I've had to get new underwear. I've had to get new sheets. It was ridiculous. Okay, let's talk about some unusual things. G.L. Simpson, I hadn't been in practice very long, and he called me Dr. Gary. And he said, call me, and he said, Dr. Gary, he said, I have been fooling with something that I have never seen before. And now that's the red flag, because G.L. Simpson repaired Moses' hernia and he's well into his 70s. He has seen everything. And when he said, he's never seen anything like it, and he said, would you take a look? I said, I'd love to. This lady comes in, a little old lady, and her husband, he's got on bibbed overalls. They live up in the Allegheny Clifty area or somewhere way out in the country. And on her right hand, she had something the size of a golf ball. Now, if you can imagine setting a golf ball right here, that's what it was. It was not tender around it. I pushed around it, wasn't red. I got up a little close to see if I could get a whiff of any kind of odor. Nothing. No discharge, no drainage. Well, in medicine, you got three choices, so this ought to be pretty simple. You get bacteria? Not that. Is it a virus? No. No virus gonna do anything like that. So that leaves you with a fungus. So I called GL back and I said, did you biopsy this? No. I said, let's biopsy and let's culture for a fungus. Well, I stopped by the lab 3 days later. What's growing? Nothing. I stopped by the lab a week later. What's growing? Nothing. A week and a half, nothing. 2 weeks, nothing. I'm on the wrong track. And the sweet little lady, she stuck with me. You know, I didn't try to be a hero. I said, I have no idea. I said, I haven't seen anything like this. I had all kind of books, colored pictures. And I'm at night, you know, what is this? What is this? But and finally, I said, I'm gonna make a call to Nashville, and if I can get this guy to see you, I said, I'll pay whatever it costs, his office fee, and I could tell they didn't have a whole lot of money. And I said, I'll drive you down there, we'll find something to eat, your husband can go with you, the three of us. I said, if I can arrange all that, will you do it? And they talked about it a while, and they said, yeah, we'll do that. I called this guy in Nashville, and I started describing it. And he said, Gibbons, don't do it. Don't come down. I said, that's a nice gesture, but he said, I already know what it is. I said, you're kidding. He said, no, I know what it is. He said, you go back to her and you ask her if she's been shucking corn. And said, I think you're gonna be, stunned when you get your answer. Well, sure enough, he was right on it. It was something called sporotrichosis that's caused by a fungus. Well, why didn't I find it? I'm doctoring for a fungus. That's what I'm thinking. And he said, you didn't let it cook long enough. He said, sometimes it takes 6 weeks for this thing to grow out on a media. And she was already getting another knot. This thing was going up the arm. He said, the only thing that would cure this is iodine. Plain old-fashioned iodine drops. Said, put drops in water, you drank it 3 times a day. Sure enough, cured this lady. Fast forward about 15 years. This guy is in there. I had found out his wife had TB. So all the family, they all wanted to see me. They lived in Butler County, and they were always going to Bowling Green to get their medical care. So he just wanted his blood pressure checked, and I did it, but he had his brother-in-law or something sitting over there. And just as I'm getting ready to leave, the brother-in-law takes his hand out of his pocket, and by golly, there it was again. And I said, oh, this is unbelievable. He said, Doc, can you take care of this? I said, yeah, I think I can. So I write him the prescription. And I explained to him, I said, this will make you think you got the mumps. You'll have a bad taste in your mouth. But I said, it'll do it. The rest of the story is, and I didn't know all this, he goes to Morgantown to the drugstore and he hands a prescription and says, how much is it? And they said $1.89. He jerks the prescription away from him and storms out of the drugstore, doesn't even feel. And goes home, tells everybody what had transpired, and they said, well, what's gonna hurt? You might try it. You gotta do something. He had been in the hospital in Bowling Green for 30 straight days and had seen 4 doctors, and they were talking amputation. They were bringing that word up. Now, why one of the doctors, didn't pull my church routine. My church routine is, in a case like that, I look in the mirror and say, I surrender all. In other words, I've had it. And now why somebody wouldn't do that, rather than start thinking about taking a guy's arm off. So anyway, that cured him, and that got all over Butler County, and everybody had a fit about that. I seem to remember days. I can't remember years, all this stuff. But this was another Sunday, and this guy called me, and he said, "Are you Dr. Givens? And I said, I am. And for some reason, he got around to Ray Ryan. And did I know? I said, well, you know, I've heard of the guy. And he said, well, he's up here unconscious. So we got him on the ground and we're loading him into a car. Said he's been bucked off of a horse and we can't rouse him. And I said, no problem. Just bring him into the emergency room. There's a doctor there that'll see him, that's on call. And he said, I don't think so. He said, we have talked to some people up here at Rosewood. Said, we want you checking. And said, if you don't come to the emergency room, we're coming to get you. In the yard. So I get up there.
Sound like you get that kind of stuff a lot.
Ray Ryan, at that time, he had a body that was probably a good 30 years younger than his chronological age. I mean, you could tell he had devoted a lot of time to exercise, had a gray goatee. He was mumbling around, couldn't rouse him. We did x-rays and everything was fine. And there was 3 guys with him. 2 of them had on a suit and tie. The other guy had an open collar with a little leather jacket. In other words, it wasn't the type stuff you'd expect to see out in the country on a Sunday. When I got through checking him, I said, I think he's had a severe concussion and I think he'll be all right. But I said, we need to get him in the ambulance and send him to Evansville, which is where he lived. Because I said, Deaconess is the first hospital in this part of the country to have a CAT scan. And I said, I could be totally wrong. I said, he could have bleeding in the brain or anything. And I said, that CAT scan will pick it up. And I said, everything's perfect. You're over there where he lives. He said, we're not going. He said, we're staying right here. And said, you're going to stay with us until we tell you to go home. Well, that was about 11 o'clock in the morning. And finally, they found me. I think I was in the cafeteria or something, and it was getting dark. And they said, Doc, said, come up here and look. Said he's playing backgammon. I mean, he was a game person. He liked all kind of games. And he was just totally fine. And they said, well, you can go home now. And, so that was my Ray Ryan story. And there's no question that these guys, I always thought about why wouldn't they have gone to Evansville? And I think they didn't want to be seen with him. The connection, that's why they were out in the country. And of course, y'all know the end to that story. He got a guy in an atrium in Las Vegas and took him for between $600,000 and $800,000 playing gin rummy because he had a spotter on the balcony in the back with high-powered binoculars, and they were communicating with each other. Well, the mafia found out how he did it, and they told him, they said, now, if you will return the money, we'll forget this. Well, of course, he didn't return the money, and they didn't forget it. So when he turned on his car, that's when he disappeared. One other thing, and then we'll quit, or a couple of things. I don't know how long I'd been here, but this guy called me from University of Louisville and said he was chairman of the medical department and wanted to know if I would come up and talk to the students on grand rounds. Grand rounds was always my favorite thing. In medicine, that's the dateline problem. That's the whodunit, where they have a patient on the stage and they try to mislead you with all this crap that they've ordered. And it was on a Tuesday. I said, I cannot do that. I said, I just can't do it. I said, I'm too busy. But I said, I appreciate it. And they said, well, we've looked at some of your records where you've sent people up here through the years. They said, well, we got a second thing for you. He said, would you be on the staff at the university and teach students? And I said, well, let me think about that. And I went home, talked to Jane about it. And bless her heart, she went along with it. You know, I said, this will be a big problem. I said, these kids will be hanging around the house. There'll be good kids, there'll be bad kids. They'll eat with us, they'll just drive you crazy. But I said, you know, maybe I ought to do it because it'll keep me sharp. Because you got to know more than the student. Because I mean, they'd wear you out in a minute. You know, what's this, what's that? They knew the answers. They just want to see if I knew. So anyway, I started getting these medical students every summer. Some of you may remember them. I'd have girls and guys and all like this. And I will go into these one situation. They sent me two guys. One of them's daddy was secretary of the Kentucky Medical Association. The other one looked like Jack Nicholson, the actor, and he's prematurely bald, and he had a little speech impediment. The nurses could not stay away from him. They couldn't keep their hands off him. There's so many stories about them. Anyway, they go to Hopkinsville and get to partying. And remember, we had a toll in Central City, a quarter. Y'all remember that?
Mm.
Well, they pulled the car over someplace, turned off the lights, and this one that had the speech impediment took off every stitch of clothes he had, climbed on the hood, and got a hold of the hood ornament, and he had a quarter in his hand. Now, there's a lady down there that took up the money. So they ease up to the basket, and he puts the quarter in there, saying going through, and they just took off. Well, she gets on the phone, tries to get the cops. They've already way disappeared. Other thing is, the nurses call me at 3 o'clock in the morning. We're missing a nurse. Well, what's that? What's that got to do with it? They said, we know where she is. And said, you got to come over here. So we cannot have this kind of crap. So, you know, here I gotta go over at 3 o'clock in the morning, and I knock on the door, he comes to the door. I said, let's make a round. He said, at 3 o'clock? I said, yeah, I just want to get an early start. And, you know, he phones around, gets out of there, and I told him, I said, no, look, I'm not into this type of stuff. You do whatever you want, but you can't do it, you're in the hospital. Third thing is, they were about finished with their rotation with me. They had another 2 or 3 days to go. I had been up all night, and they liked to go to the farm. They were big gun people, target practice and all this type stuff. And they said they wanted to stop at E.A. Cohen. And I'm laying in the back seat as a family. They had to buy some stuff. They came out a few minutes later, and they said that he's having trouble finding the stuff. Come on in there. Well, they drug me to the front door. I was so tired, I didn't go any further. Julius was back in the back, he waves at me. Well, I wave at him. These kids go to Louisville, I get the bill from Julius, a little under $500. They had bought everything. And what they've done is they go in and say they're charging this to Dr. Gibbons, and he didn't believe me. Because he'd never seen them before in his life, so they called me in to, you know, they called me from Louisville, and I mean, they were laughing. Of course, they knew I wasn't going to do anything. They had done thousands of dollars of work for me during the summer, and they didn't get paid anything. One thing, and I'll quit. Even though small towns were not my forte or what, Central City had just really had a wealth of something that you can't find in any other small community. Auburn, Lewisburg, Russellville, wherever. And I would sneak out of social functions, but if I could ever get invited to a thing where Bobby Watkins, Keith Bivens, Marion Tindall, Ronnie Bean, or any of those, I wouldn't miss it for the world. And I thought about taking recorders, but I was afraid I would get caught. Because these guys were naming names. I would just split my sides. It was so funny. It's a shame that somebody in town didn't harvest those stories, those coal mining stories. One that I can tell that's not Just really terrible. They told, they had the guy's name, the whole works. They said when they grew up, the coal mining houses were all off of the ground that you could see under them. And they said some of them had a front porch, some of them didn't, but they had steps up front and you'd go into the living room. Well, there were steps in the back that took you into the kitchen. Well, this coal miner comes in and he is loaded, he is drunk. And his wife has surprised him, she's waiting up to catch him. So she goes and catches him and he is holding on in the kitchen and he's peeing out on the step. She just goes bonkers. He goes out on the steps and pees back in the kitchen. The next day in the mines, he tells all the fellas, he says, you know, I've got a problem, said I just can't please her. So it doesn't matter which way I pee. That's about all I got.
That's a great story.